Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tenpenny Files. I'm your host, Dr. Sherri Tenpenny. The Tenpenny Files isn't just another podcast. The Tenpenny Files is daily conversations meant to inform and educate, not just to entertain. I come prepared, and we let the discussion unfold naturally with people worth hearing on topics worth exploring. If it matters to your health, your freedom, or your future, we talk about it here on the Tenpenny Files. Each day I talk with authors, documentary filmmakers, and independent thinkers whose work challenges mainstream messaging. We cover a wide range of topics, from government, politics, and history, to astronomy, pets, and travel, to food, farming, and fitness, to health policy, and vaccines. And every week we have weekly conversations with authors who write about faith and biblical principles. My goal is simple: to introduce you to topics you've never heard of before, or to topics you wish you had time to explore but you didn't know where to start. If this sounds interesting to you, the Tenpenny Files is your place to be. Join me every day, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern, to hear from voices that have often been ignored, silenced, or censored, but they truly have something to say. But before we begin today's episode, I want to invite all of you to become a Tenpenny Prime member. Tenpenny Prime members receive an exclusive monthly white paper about your body, a recorded presentation, and access to our monthly Ask the Expert Masterclass. And every month, those classes just get better. Visit primemembership.drtenpenny.com. That's primemembership.drtenpenny.com to learn more and to support the work that we're doing to bring you the best information that we can. So let's get started with today's conversation. We're having our conversation today with award-winning author and rural policy expert Brian Reisinger, author of Land Rich, Cash Poor: My Family's Hope and the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farmer, the truth about America's most detrimental and overlooked socioeconomic crisis that we maybe have ever faced: the loss of the family farm. Brian, welcome so much to the Tenpenny Files. It's so good to see you again.
Oh, it's so good to be back with you. I appreciate it. And thanks for everything you do to highlight issues with our farms and food and beyond.
Well, tell us about the origins of your life on a family farm.
Yeah, I grew up working with my dad from the time I could walk. Our farm was is in the hills of southern Wisconsin in the Midwest. And we were a dairy farm for more than 100 years. And we have faced all of the challenges that have been wiping out farms for a century. We've been losing farms in this country at the rate of 45,000 per year for a century, 45,000 a year. And if we continue to do that, we're going to lose the rest of our family farms within this generation. I'm 41 years old now. By the time my daughter, my little 1-year-old girl, is my age, we'll have lost the rest of our farms like I grew up on. And I grew up knowing this was happening. I didn't know the scope of the problem, but you didn't have to be an author yet as a little kid on a farm to know that your way of life was disappearing. People coming in the driveway saying this farm went under, this farm sold. So when I got older and got the chance to pursue a writing craft farm, I want to understand why. And so I decided to tell the story of those hidden areas of history driving that disappearance, the impact it has on our food, our health, our economy, and weave that with our family's story, surviving from the Great Depression through COVID and beyond.
You said I read your book. It was published, 2004, I believe, and it's gotten a lot of awards and a lot of accolades. It's really well written. In fact, there's stories in there that are absolutely heart-wrenching, that really tell the story of the love of the land and love of the family farm. And you mentioned that statistic back in October of 2004, about 45,000 farms per year that are disappearing. Um, I would imagine it's worse now. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, absolutely. The situation compounds itself every year and every decade. We first began losing farms in this country during the Great Depression. It was actually a couple years before that, an agricultural depression, and then a number of farms recovered a little bit as people fled the cities with the economic squalor that was going on, and then we picked right back up with it. And we have lost farms every decade since. And so this is something that's been compounding for a long time. It's us failing to handle economic crises the way we need to, not understanding how they affect the family farm uniquely. It's government policy from both sides of the aisle over the years, over the decades, the establishment of the Republican Party as well as the Democrats and the left. And it's the way technology has moved agriculture forward, which is a good thing, but it's also been a double-edged sword swinging back the other direction and leaving family farms behind needlessly. So been this drive for farms to get big or get out, and farms have either gotten bigger to survive or they've had to go by the wayside now. And at this point, it's reached crisis levels. You and your listeners know this. We have an insecure food supply that can have sudden shocks to the system that send food prices spiraling, on top of the fact that many people are questioning the health of our food system and what's for dinner. And it affects our national security. It affects, for folks who care about the environment, it affects the land and the environment. It affects every facet of our life if we don't have a sustainable food supply that's grown by, free Americans operating small businesses trying to do something they care deeply about, which has been the ethic of this from the beginning in our country.
What's really driving this crisis? Is it really economic that small farmers can no longer really afford to farm the land? I grew up in rural north central Ohio. I grew up on an 80-acre farm, and then my father had purchased a 100-acre farm kind of down the road that we rented out to someone who wanted to farm it. And and I know that it was a good additional income. My father was a chiropractor, and so he was kind of a resident farmer. We raised horses. We didn't, go out and plow the land. But times have changed so much, just on the cost of equipment, the cost of gasoline, the cost of maintenance, and the drop in the prices in the commodity prices of corn, bean, and wheat, which are the main commodities that we produce in the heartland of America. Is this crisis of small farmers selling out to the big conglomerates, is it mostly an economic issue?
It's mainly an economic issue, and it's driven by the conditions in our economy, those economic crises, the government policies, and the technological issues I'd mentioned, combined with the fact that we've moved into this globalized world. And so the farmer, whatever their size really, is the little guy in their economic picture in terms of the forces that they're dealing with, the people they're buying from and selling to, etc. The farmer is usually the small one in that economic chain. And so as our American economy becomes dominated more and more by large players dominating industries, that creates that pressure for farmers too. Everyone's keeping up with the Joneses. And so those farms that got big got that way working to survive, and those farms that fell by the wayside got that either because they couldn't make that transition or didn't want to and wanted to hold the line against that. And you've got perfectly good. It's really a perversion of the market, I should say too, by all these forces because you got perfectly competitive, perfectly hardworking, adaptable family farms doing their best, but they just don't have the economic scale, and so they have to get bigger or or get left behind at some point. And that's been happening at a rapid clip now for decades.
And isn't part of it too the loss of young people on the farms? I mean, because his farming historically in this country had been, well, even before this country was even formed, was a multi-generational pride in being a farmer and raising food and animal husbandry and things like that. But that there's really no exit strategy now for the older farmers that are, say, in their 60s or 70s and are not wanting to grind it out every day, year in and year out. And the younger people who are going to white collar jobs somewhere off in the city. It used to be to blue collar jobs, but now they're going off to more white collar jobs. And they don't want to be, they grew up in that and it's not a heritage to them. It's more like a burden to them. So they don't want to stay behind and become a farmer like dad and granddad. Is part of it the fleeing of the brain trust there?
I'm so glad you asked about that. That has been one of the foundational issues for a long time. It really kicked in with the close of the Great Depression and the close of World War II, especially as our economy shifted from rural to urban. That was a big driver of it. What I would say at this point is the pendulum has really begun to change. Aging farmers are still having challenges trying to find who's going to take over the farm. That's for sure. But I don't think it's because we've just got people fleeing that rural economy nonstop now. I think about people like my nephews. There's all kinds of 4-H kids, FFA kids who would proudly take over grandpa's farm or dad's farm or their uncle's farm down the road or the farm that their grandma ran for years after grandpa passed, whatever it may be, but they're not being told that there's a bright economic future. We've lost a lot of the kids who weren't going to farm. My family, we wrestled with this, as you know from reading the book. My sister's one of the heroes of the story because she had the talent for cattle and crops take over the farm, and I was pulled toward writing even though I loved my roots. And so I've wrestled with this exact issue, and I've come back around, and I not only tell our story, but I help our farm on the business side, and I'm trying to help plot the path forward while also helping out the farmyard and fields when I'm back. But my sister being that successor was such a crucial thing for our family. I think there are a lot of young kids out there who would do that, but they don't have guidance counselors telling them that that's a good career move, you know? So these are kids that are going off to the military, they're working in the trades, they're going to college. Those are all noble things to do. But a lot of them might love to farm if they thought they could get a shot at it, but they're afraid of what to do with their lives next because of this dark economic picture we've left for our family farms.
Yeah, I think that's true because if you've grown up in it and you've seen your dad struggle and you've seen, the pressures of the economic pressures and I've always thought that farmers were such heroes because the biggest thing that they fight against is a variable they can't control, which is the weather. It's too much rain, not enough rain. They can't get it's cold too long. They can't get the crops in. I mean, I watched it for years because I grew up in it. And I've always thought that they were such a hero to take on all of the things that go along with farming and then have the biggest variable of all that you have no control over just being weather. So I can imagine why the younger generation, the Gen Zs, who are the 15 to 30-year-olds are like, how can I do this? How can I make a living? I see my father and my grandfather, I've grown up with the struggle and I don't want that struggle. So that economics is really a big deal. How do you think we can change that reflection? Does it have something to do with the cost of the crops to the farmers, of how much it costs to make the corn, wheat, and grain, and to raise a cow or a sheep or a pig, and then because right now, we go to the grocery store and food costs are like through the roof. One steak is like $30. I have a friend that lives in Austin, Texas, that was going to buy a roast for like six people, so not huge, six people for Thanksgiving, and it was $150. Now, that increase in how much we're paying for at groceries at the grocery store, that money's not going to the farmers or to the cattle raisers. Where's that money going?
Yeah, correct. That's a really good question. It's a good observation. So you're right. The farmer isn't putting more money in their pocket, or the small ranchers put more money in their pocket. The first thing that's going on is that the food in this country, by the time, in most cases, by the time it's getting to your dinner table, it's changed hands many times from the farm gate to the dinner table. Bought up by buyers, distributors, goes through processors, goes through retailers, over and over. And so there are a lot of hands getting a cut of that money before it gets back to the farmer. And some of that's natural economics. Um, but then the other thing that's going on is that farmers are also facing higher prices. So not only are they not getting much of that money that is reflected in the higher price, but they've got higher costs for seed, feed, fertilizer, energy, what have you. So what I always say to people is that when your hardworking American family is facing a crunch, your hardworking American farmer is facing the same kind of crunch. We're in league together in that. The farmer isn't making more money and is facing their own version of that crunch. All the cost that any household is, plus what it takes to run a small business that's based on the land.
I think that more and more people are becoming much more conscious about the food that they're eating. I think Secretary Kennedy, being the head of HHS and trying to get the food additives out of the food and, to do some things to change the food pyramid that recently happened and things like that. People are really wanting to, as much as possible, go to farmers markets and to buy local. Is that helping the small American farms?
It is. It's part of the picture for sure. So there's a couple different layers of this, but the first one is direct to consumer. When more people care about where their food comes from, it creates more opportunities for the American farmer to sell their food directly to those consumers through farmers markets, through online marketplaces. Maybe they're selling, at a local permanent market, specialty store, whatever it might be. The other thing that we need more of that. We need more of that to grow. We need people to accept what it means to shop for food seasonally, where some things are available sometimes a year and sometimes there's a convenience factor to that some people may not like, but there's also, oh, this is in season now. It's the way that we used to eat in this country. But the other thing is having more market infrastructure sprout up for folks who want to buy and process and distribute local, regional, and specialty foods. So some of it is that fresh produce that can be sold directly. Some of it might be that special type of ancient grain that's going to go into the flour that can be used for, the local bakery that bakes bread, far beyond anything you would find, from your conventional, proverbial loaf of sliced bread. And so, there's all these specialty food markets that are also sprouting up. So we need that demand to continue, and we need entrepreneurs not only in farming, but in all different parts of the food supply chain to help create more small businesses that are working to get that new specialty crop or evolving things that farmers can grow to market. Because we have a lot of farmers who are stuck in markets that aren't necessarily growing anymore. And we need new growing markets. We can't guarantee the survival of every farm, and we shouldn't, guarantee that this market's going to operate this way forever. But what we do need to do is make sure that we have new entrepreneurial opportunity for our farmers in this country, and that hasn't been the case for too long in America.
With the loss of our family farm, even though we still have the mega farms, the really big industrial farms like with Cargill and places like that, and we've got the terrible feedlot things that raise our chickens and our cattle these days that are just horrifying. When people are trying to get away from that, how big does the loss of the family farm, how does that impact our food supply when we've got these big mega conglomerates that are still providing food? And I really want to put a focus on what real food is. When I go to the grocery store, if you walk down the aisle, I just feel like like all of this colored packaged stuff is screaming at me, I'm poison, I'm poison, I'm poison, as you're walking down the aisle. And I've frequently taught my patients, really, you should shop around the edges, which is where bread, dairy, all your meat products, eggs, and things like that. And the only aisle you're allowed to go down is the one that has laundry detergent and toilet paper. Shop around the edges. But we've still got huge, big processing, big food companies, big ag that are producing stuff that goes into the grocery store. How much impact on our food supply is it really happening with the loss of the smaller family farms?
Yeah, it's a great question. What's really going on is the way that the American economy has grown and consolidated over the decades, and the way that globalization has helped drive that too. Again, you've got farmers that are needing to get bigger than they'd like to be in many cases, to try to survive that. Here's what's going on. A large amount of our food is produced by that national supply chain that requires really large operations. Here's the thing that I was shocked by when I investigated this for the book and married our family stories with the issues that were driving this. I was amazed to learn that of the nearly, we've lost 70% of our farms, as I said, 45,000 a year, but of the nearly 2 million left, 96% of them are family operations, 88% of them are small family operations. And what's going on here is we've got
That's
families who are,
Brian,
well, I'm sorry.
that's really important. Repeat those stats again. That's really
Yeah, absolutely. Of the nearly 2 million farms we have left, 96% are family operations still, and 88% are small family operations. Yeah. And I was shocked by that, even though I had grown up on one of these small and medium-sized farms and grown up around them. And what's going on is you have families that are holding on by working multiple jobs. So they might be pouring concrete or working a factory shift or whatever the case may be, running another small business and farming. And so what we need is for these family farms to be able to be growing entrepreneurial ventures again, the kind of farm that can provide a full-time living to a family so that they can focus on that, produce more food, create more options for our consumers rather than working two, three jobs just to hold on.
how do we get that to happen? How do we increase the pricing of food? Well, it's not that we should increase the prices of food. We should distribute more of the food backwards down the food chain to the farmer. Are there policies that need to be changed? Or you're involved in that industry. What needs to take place here to save our family farms?
There's a couple things I always tell people just briefly. There's three main components. There's more to unpack, but there's three main components. One is American innovation, making sure it's reaching all of our farms of all types and sizes. The other is government policy to make sure that our markets are fair. And then the other is consumer demand. So just to take each one of those real briefly. On American innovation, we have had technology that has tilted away from small and medium-sized farms, the type of equipment that can only work for the largest of operations. What we need is technology that is what they call scale neutral, whether it's private sector technology being invested in by companies or whether it's that research that the government does. We need scale neutral technology that's going to allow farms, small and medium as well as large, to be able to access and be able to afford that technology. On the issue of government policy, we need to make sure we have fair markets domestically and internationally, that they're not the kind of markets that squeeze out small business, and that our government policies around subsidy and things like that. Right now, we have so much of our government programs that go in just a few areas. The programs don't work the way they're supposed to. The money goes to a few certain types of crops and doesn't protect others. We need to find a way to make sure that our programs are functioning the way they ought to and diversify that some. And then the other part is that part with the consumer, where that we talked about it before with the farmers markets, the growth in that, the need for more growth there, the need for growth for market infrastructure for local and regional specialty foods. All of that entrepreneurship requires that more people buy their food like they care where it comes from.
Yeah, I think that people are caring where their food comes from. I think that we've become, I would say, in just in the last few years, much more conscious about that. A lot of emphasis on glyphosate, a lot of emphasis on, the pesticide industry, a lot of emphasis on the opposite end of that scale, on regenerative farming and regenerating the soil. And I think that those regenerative farming issues, I've had conversations with Joel Salatin, about the growth of regenerative farming and teaching people actually what they need to do crop rotation and animal rotation and things like that. Are there schooling opportunities for that? I mean, other than going to, Texas A&M, are there small farm educational programs? Because you said that a lot of the young people just don't believe that they want to be farmers because of the lack of potential economic solvency. Are there classes that are available either in person or online that young people can get involved with and learn more about farming?
There need to be more, but there are. So there are a lot of organizations that are focused, whether it's around organic farming or regenerative farming. There are places where your local farm bureaus, your local agriculture extensions, which are an extension of your university systems, they have increasingly more and more. In my home state in Wisconsin, they have more classes through the University of Wisconsin, either for students or for just farmers out there who want to engage with resources. They have more than ever on alternative food systems and things like that. And we need more of it. We have something in this country called a land grant university, and the University of Wisconsin is one, and there's they're all over the country, and they were endowed and created to not only advance learning, but to advance learning in terms of how we use our land and our resources. And it's very easy for universities as they grow and things change and the economy modernizes to sort of forget their mission. And there's a lot of land grant university work that hasn't really focused on how do we create new entrepreneurial opportunity for farmers? How do we make it viable for more people who want to be in that part of our economy? It's so crucial to the security of our nation, which is one of the reasons that the land grant universities were created. So there is some out there, but we need more.
Describe what land grant university is. I mean, I have something in my head that pops up of a vision of what I think that might mean. It might be totally wrong. So
Yeah.
describe land grant universities for us.
Yeah, this goes back all the way to the 1800s, when a lot of our country's early universities were first established, and they were given funding from the government, among other things, to say, hey, you're going to focus a part of your activity around researching and innovating and instructing how we use our land for the betterment of our country, because America was this vast country with all these incredible natural resources and a free market economy that wanted to harness that. And so is really what a land grant university is. Many of the major universities in this country began as land grant universities, and they may or may not still embody that mission.
So are they given land to do this with? Is that because when I think about land grant, that's what comes to my mind is like granting land, or is that just a misnomer there?
That's a good question. I don't know what all they were originally endowed with. I'm not sure, but I do know that they were put there in part to be able to focus on how are we going to utilize our natural resource to help the economy and our nation flourish.
And some of what's happening with land is I think that, there's we're going to talk a little bit more about the foreign countries that are coming into our country. But I think that because there's this big focus on rare earth minerals, and that there's more of the land that's being bought up by the government for those minerals and things like that. So I would think that if you've been granted land, you need to know what's underneath the soil. Is there a way to really find that out, to know that when I go out and buy this farm, how deep does the ownership go, and do I own everything that's underneath the grass?
Yeah, that's a great question. So mineral rights are often part of land ownership. Sometimes you can own the land, and the mineral rights can be granted somewhere, depending upon the situation. But actually, there's all kinds of parts of our country where rare metals, rare minerals have not yet been tapped. There's the ability for sustainable mining practice, and we need to make sure that we do that in a way that doesn't completely destroy the land. We want to be able to balance that, but the reality is that America hasn't focused on that kind of thing very well for a very long time. And so what ends up happening is a lot of other countries like China are very focused on making sure that they get their hands on not only their own mineral rights, but the mineral rights of other countries. And so when we talk about the purchase of farmland by foreign adversaries and other things, and when we talk about issues like global trade, a lot of what's at stake at times is whether America or other countries are going to have our hands not only on our farmland, but on land that has crucial mineral rights tied to it, on land that is near military installations, on land that is near critical infrastructure. And so the question of do we have control of our land in this country could not be more crucial, from our food to our national security on a number of levels.
Very good. Yeah, that's really, really true. And it's becoming more to the surface in mainstream conversations these days than ever before. Well, this is a good time to take a short break. So, Brian, hold that thought. We got lots more to discuss here today. Hold that thought. We're going to take a short break to hear from our sponsors for AmericaOutloud.news. America Out Loud Talk Radio plays the Tenpenny Files on the iHeartRadio network daily, Monday through Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. You can also listen anywhere in the world by logging into AmericaOutloud.news and using their media player. If you've missed any of the great conversations that we've had at the Tenpenny Files over the last, I don't know, months now, it's daily conversations that I'm really enjoying having. I hope you're enjoying them as much as I am. You can find them on Spotify, Pandora, Apple, TuneIn, iHeart Virtual Studios, and on my platforms at drtenpenny.com, drtenpenny.substack.com. We also post these on Rumble, Instagram, and X under my name, which is at Busy Dr. T. Because there's so many great books and documentaries and so many great thinkers out there with so little time to read and watch, this show is meant to jumpstart your interest and lead you in the right direction for further study. We've got a great message coming up from our sponsors. Sit tight. We will be right back. There's more to come from Brian Reisinger, author of Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope in the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farm. Zeolite is a detox spray. We work specifically with a company called Touchstone Essentials. They are an incredible company. We've been working with them now for several years. And zeolite is a mineral that goes through your body like a one-way basket. It will clean out heavy metals such as arsenic and mercury, aluminum, cadmium, and it hooks onto those metals from a one-way perspective. So once it's bound, it goes out through your urine or your stools and doesn't get redeposited in other places. Everybody needs to have a detox product in their life, and this one is so easy to use and it's so safe. You can take it when you're pregnant, you can take it when you're nursing, you can give it to little children, you can even give it to infants, and quite frankly, I give it to my dog. I actually put a little bit of the zeolite in his water because until we all stop living in a toxic world, we all need to get some of those extra toxicities out. The heavy metals, the persistent organic pollutants, the things that are floating through the air, the different things that we come in touch with in our environment. And we are a big fan of zeolite from Touchstone Essentials. We've been a big fan of their products for several years. Go to drtenpenny.com/detox to get your first bottle of zeolite spray for $50 off.
Well, only when the government bows to the people will America become great again. This is Malcolm Out Loud here. Join me in pushing back against censorship, my fellow Americans. Right at the top of AmericaOutloud.news are the words, many voices, one freedom, united in the First Amendment. Now is our time, my fellow Americans. AmericaOutloud.news, liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome back, everyone. Today, our conversation is with award-winning author and rural policy expert Brian Reisinger, the author of Land Rich, Cash Poor, My Family's Hope in the Untold History of the Disappearing American Farm, The Truth About America's Most Detrimental and Overlooked Socioeconomic Crisis, The Loss of the Family Farm. But let me tell you a little bit more about today's guest. Brian Reisinger worked with his dad on the family farm from the time he was able to walk before entering the world of business journalism and public policy, and later working as a columnist and a consultant. Among other awards, his book, Land Rich, Rich Poor, Land Rich, Cash Poor has won the Best Book Award for U.S. History and a Reader's Favorite Book Award in 2024. His writing appears in many publications across the U.S. talking about the family farm. He also serves as a senior writer for Midwestern-based Platform Communications, splitting his time between Sacramento, California, and his family's farm in Wisconsin. Brian, welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We were talking about before the break about the foreign companies, foreign countries that are coming in and buying up the family farm. What does that do to our economy, and what kind of pressure does that put on the family farms?
Yeah, absolutely. This is such a crucial and urgent issue. In fact, I just wrote a column about this for the USA Today Network. Here's what's going on. We have farmland across the country that is vulnerable to be purchased by foreign adversaries, and it is yet another force that is putting pressure on family farms that are trying to hold on. Now, here's the good news. The good news is that the best defense against foreign adversaries being able to buy our farmland is actually to help preserve our family farms. Because if you think about it, if more of our farmland gets in the hand of very few landholders, say they're large corporations that only owe their shareholders the best financial return possible, it's pretty easy to flip large amounts of land to China or Iran. But if we have individual small family farmers that have an economic path forward, able to hold on, imagine saying, I'm with the Chinese Communist Party and I'm here to buy your farm. You walk up into a farmer's porch, that's not going to happen. So what's going on is this. Countries like China have about 300,000 acres, which is a small amount of the land right now. But the thing that was alarming about it is how quickly it's been able to increase. It increased 15% in just 2 years from 20 to 22. 2020 to 2022, for example. And the reason for this is really because there are not restrictions on this and there is not transparency. And so in many cases, entities are able to get their hands on this land and it's not really clear what's going on until it's too late. The other thing about it is not only them getting their hands on the land that makes up our food supply, which is, an issue for our food, our health, our national security in its own right, but also often this land is near military installations and critical infrastructure, creating an even more direct threat to our security.
Doesn't the Secretary of Interior and the Secretary of Agriculture need to have their hands on that? Or is it
Yeah.
just a private transaction between a country and a landowner?
It's a great question. So there are ways that the government tracks the amount of land held by foreign countries in general, including foreign adversaries. And there are some requirements around disclosure, but most of them are confidential, and they're really for the government's purposes of tracking this. There aren't a lot of safeguards that help people at the point of sale know if they're selling to someone that has a foreign investor, for example. And because more and more of our farmland has been slipping from the hands of individual farm families to large companies, it's again very easy for a large company that isn't concerned with these kinds of things to go ahead and sell. Now, there is a nuance to this debate that I think is important to note. Um, the number of foreign adversaries buying land versus the number of just foreign entities in general. So there are some industries in agriculture in America that will say, well, having friendly investment from friendly countries that say can help us pioneer a new industry they've done in their country, etc., that's something we want to be open to. Other farmers will say they would never dream of having a foreign investor in their land. But there's a difference in any case between foreign entities in general, foreign countries that might be part of friendly countries, allies, and then those adversaries. In Wisconsin, in my home state, they recently passed legislation that said that if you are listed as a foreign adversary, according to the federal government, this is your Chinas, your Irans, your North Koreas, you just can't buy farmland in Wisconsin at all. There are many states that haven't realized that that is an issue, and so this is kind of on the cutting edge of the debate.
Well, two questions come to mind about that. One is, um, don't most of the foreign buyers that come to buy your, let's say they're coming to you and they knock on your door and want to buy your farm, how do you even know they're from China or from Iran? Don't they usually have a broker intermediary that you wouldn't necessarily know that, or is it required for full disclosure?
Yeah, oftentimes things will be set up by brokers and things, and you might ultimately find out who the end buyer is, but you may not know that they have a foreign investor has a controlling interest, for example. Now, the
Mm.
good news is that right now, most farm sales are, from one farm to another neighboring farm that's getting bigger to survive, things like that. So it's not like we've got, foreign agents walking up every farm driveway in this country. But the reality is that because there aren't a lot of restrictions or safeguards or requirements for transparency, that this is something that is coming. And that's why people were so concerned about the increase, that double-digit increase that I mentioned from 2020 to 2022. And it has been demonstrated and documented that the land that has been purchased by foreign adversaries is near military installations. Again, I mean, countries like the Chinese are both patient in terms of getting their hands on our land over time, and they're strategic in terms of making sure that the stuff that they do get their hands on has more than one piece of value to it. So it's not only the acreage and what it means for our food supply, it's that, oh, look, that field is right next to this military installation. These things are not coincidences, as I know you and your listeners well know.
I wrote a Substack on this a while back, and when I did the research on foreign land ownership, I was surprised at the number one foreign land owner in this country is Canada
Mm.
by a large margin, like 12 million acres or something like that. And on the list, close to the top, is like Belgium and other European countries. Why would those countries come here and buy such large swaths of land in comparison? Because China and Bill Gates, the people always talk about how much land they're buying, they have several 100,000 acres, but their 12 million acres belongs to Canada and something like 6 million belongs to, I believe it's Belgium.
Yep.
What are they buying land for and why the disparity?
It's a good question, and it depends a lot country to country, individual to individual. Generally speaking, what we're talking about is foreign investment in agriculture, in the same way that you might have foreign investment in another industry. You might have a foreign investment in manufacturing here in America, and so there can be good elements to attracting investment. There are types of farming that were pioneered by people who came here from other countries. I mean, my ancestors were from Bavaria. The Bavarians and the Swiss are among the people who came and pioneered dairy and cheese making, and so. So there's natural reasons on a smaller scale for other countries to want to invest in America, and again, for some farm sectors to be interested in that, whereas others would never do that in this day and age. But I do think that, people validly ask the question at this point, why do other countries have such large shares of our farmland? And I think it's important to draw the distinction between a Canada and a foreign adversary. Now, it's gotten more tense and they aren't always acting in our interest. We have to be clear-eyed about that. But a China that is plotting for our demise versus a Canada that isn't always dealing with us fairly, but I think wants to be an ally is a different thing. Now, I do have to say though, Canada was one of the big reasons that we lost so many farms in the last decade because one of the things they were doing, they have a very controlled dairy industry. And their government manages their supply. It's very hard to get into dairy farming in Canada or expand your herd. And so they were doing that, and our American farmers were competing with them, and they were doing things like there were different types of milk fats that they don't sell on the open market. They don't have a need for. So they were dumping those, meaning they were selling them beneath market value and depressing the price. It's an example of how even, traditionally friendly countries can either cheat or do unfair trade practices that hurt our American farmers. And so that's one of the reasons we do have such a big debate going on with Canada right now. I think that your average American would be safer traveling to Canada than they would to China or Iran. But I think that that doesn't mean that these countries are always dealing with us in a fair way.
Really good. That's really true. The loss of the family farm, what are the consequences of that on our health as a
Yeah.
nation?
Yeah. Well, we're not only losing the farms that feed us, we're losing a part of ourselves. And part of that is the health of our food. As we lose more and more family farms and those farms and the other businesses that are left that are helping to produce our food, it requires that more of our food travels farther. It requires that more of our food is uniform. And, all the things about our national supply chain that have gone maybe too far. And so it does contribute toward hyper processed foods. It does contribute toward food that people don't necessarily know where it's coming from or what's in it. And so that has a major impact on our health. The other thing is, people don't realize necessarily that the price of our food going up because our farms are disappearing, and that's tied to our health too. And what I mean by that is, as we lose 45,000 farms a year, it weakens our supply chain. It means that there's fewer places for the food to come from and fewer ways for it to get from the farm gate to the dinner table. That means that one great big distribution center going down can have an outsized impact on our food supply. The supply goes down and the price goes up. And when that happens, it makes it even harder for people to afford food. They're more likely to go and buy even more highly processed foods, and so that economic pressure creates pressure on our health as well.
Because we are losing 45,000 farms a year, how many do we have left, and when is this crisis irreversible?
It's a great question. We have about 2 million farms left, and we're really getting to the point where it's about to be irreversible. So when I mention that, within my little girl's lifetime, she's 1 year old. By the time she's 41, we're on track to lose the rest of our family farms. Here's the issue. When I say that this will happen within the next generation, that's actually a very loud alarm bell because the solutions to this will take years and in many cases decades. It takes years for any one single farm to be able to convert toward more promising markets. It takes decades for those markets to grow enough and the market infrastructure to grow around that and the direction of our country in terms of how we get our food to change. So, these are decades long solutions, and so we do need to act now.
What do you think are some of the first steps that need to be taken on a state level more than a federal level to preserve our family farms?
One of the biggest things that states can do is they can make sure that, well, number one, whether it's tax or regulatory burdens, that we don't have ways that the government is just making farming harder and more expensive. It could be around water rights. It could be around any number of things. Are we doing things that hamstring our farms? Because a lot of times the people that are going for, like, let's say a regulation that's aimed at the biggest farms out there, it's the small farms that don't have the money, the compliance, the lawyers, the accountants, the lobbyists to shape these policies and to be able to get through them, let alone the money that it costs to deal with the expense. And so we have to be aware of that. And then the other thing is if states can be working on programs that can help us find ways to connect the older aging generation of farmers with young people who want to farm. In some cases, those older generation are going to have people in their family, sons or daughters in their family want to take it over. We need it to be economical for them to be able to sell it to the next generation in a way that can fund their retirement, but be affordable for the next generation. And then in scenarios where there isn't someone within the family, there are all kinds of young families that would love to get land access to be able to start a farming operation. And we need to be able to connect them with the older generation of aging farmers if they don't have a successor in their family.
Is there some sort of a, for lack of a better term, some sort of a small farmer organization that they can get together and try to come up with solutions and have some saying power against these big lobbyists and these big companies that have endless money and endless attorneys and all these different things and lobbying power? Is there a lobbying power for the small farmer when they go to Washington, D.C.?
Yeah, there are a variety of organizations. There's the Farm Bureau, there's the Farmers Union, there's all kinds of different organizations that represent farmers. And here's what we run into. What we run into is I talked with a farmer recently whose story I told about where they got wiped out by a change in trade that impacted asparagus farmers. And they were talking about how the farmer is the throwaway in a deal, whether it's a big trade deal being negotiated or whether it's a big government policy. And what he meant by that is, you've got the farmer is just one link in the chain of the broader agriculture and food economy. And then that agriculture and food economy, to the point of your earlier questions, are alongside of manufacturing, alongside of rare minerals, all. So when all these things are being put up against one another, it's very easy, even if they are actively lobbying for the family farmer, to be swept aside. And so what I'm always saying to people is we need to help make sure that our policymakers on both sides now understand the stakes for our family farms and that they want our consumers, our voters want family farms supplying our food in this country. And that can really change things.
I've listened to several interviews and press releases, conversations with Brooke Rollins, that she seems to be really on the side of the small farmer. Is there more discussion coming out of Washington and out of the Secretary of Agriculture about preserving the family farm and the small farmers now? Because I know in the past there really have, I've talked to other farmers and people like yourself that have written books about farming, and they said there was like a wall, you couldn't get to them. Is she more responsive to the crisis that we have right now?
It's a good question. There is a lot of conversation. I've talked with a lot of farmers and a lot of farm groups that feel like they've been able to have the dialogue. And I think that what we're running into is the challenges are just so vast. These are decades long challenges that have been embedded into our government. And so I think that, there are farmers who are hopeful. There are also farmers who are frustrated, whatever party is in power. And so, my hope is that the dialogues can continue and that we can continue to find a way to shift policy more and more toward putting family farms first in this country.
Do you think it's heading in that direction? I mean, she seems to be. I've heard both sides of the story, and I spend a lot of time in D.C. with Maha Action and different things that I'm involved with down there. And I've heard both sides of the story. I've heard that she talks a good story about the family farmer, but that she really leans towards big ag and big agriculture and big ag and everything that's going along with that. Um, do you think there's reason to hope, really, that something is going to change?
It's a good question. I know that there are a lot of farmers who feel like they've gotten an open ear, and I think that's a start. And I think that the reality is that it took us decades, and both parties and everybody in between to wreck this problem, and it's going to take a very long time to fix it. And so I'm hoping that Secretary Rollins and the administration could be as concerted as possible, and that our government, whoever our elected officials are and whatever party is in power, is able to have that concerted focus on an ongoing basis. I mean, we do have in this country, ultimately, we have a two-party system where one party or the other is going to control different parts of the government. And so when I think about this and when I talk to farmers about this, it's really about transforming our policymakers on both sides of the aisle, irregardless, because at the end of the day, we have to have everybody focused on putting family farms first.
It really isn't a political issue, or it shouldn't be a left-right issue. It should be because everybody doesn't matter if they're Republican or Democrat, they still have to eat. So
Right.
it shouldn't
That's
be
right.
a policy issue that's divided along political lines.
That's right.
Your book, Land Rich Cash Poor, won the Best Book Award for U.S. History and the Reader's Favorite Book Award in 2024. In the closing minutes that we have our time together here, Brian, tell us a little bit more about your book.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for that. The book actually came out with a new paperback edition just a few months ago. People can find it on Amazon, anywhere else they buy books online. You can also find it in bookstores nationwide. And really, what we tried to do is we tried to tell a raw and honest story of what's happened to the American farmer. We wove the hidden errors of history driving that disappearance. What are the issues driving? What are the impacts? We wove that with my family's story from the Great Depression to today. And so we talk about my great grandparents digging a living out of the dirt when they got to this country. We talk about my grandparents surviving the Great Depression. My parents, one of the stories that we tell is they were married in 1976, the year of a drought. And as they faced that drought, they were sailing into the farm crisis of the 1980s. And so we tell stories as honestly as we could about economic upheaval, weather that blesses and threatens, farmland, tragic accidents, all the things that happen to a farm family over 4 generations trying to survive. And the thing I tell people is, every farm family that I've talked to has stories like that. And maybe the difference between our family and others is that we got the moment to pick our nose up from the grindstone and try to tell an honest story on behalf of everybody.
How can people get involved in saving the family farm?
One of the biggest ways is to take steps in terms of the way that they buy their food. So, looking for ways to buy your food in a way where you can trace it back to a family farm. That can mean a farmer's market. It can mean stopping at a local butcher shop. It can mean asking your grocer to carry local goods because many will if they know people will buy it. Nobody in this country right now, with how our system is set up, is most people are not equipped to get all of their food from a local farm, but you can get a lot of it. And so, if everyone took a half step toward a family farmer in some form or fashion, it would completely revolutionize the way we produce food in this country and create new entrepreneurial opportunity for our farmers. The same is true when you're talking to your elected officials. Think when you're buying your food, what am I doing to create entrepreneurial opportunity for the family farm? And when you talk to your policymakers, don't ask them, do you support the farmer? Because they'll all raise a hand. They've all taken votes that support the farmer, right? But ask them, what are you doing to create entrepreneurial opportunity for our farms? And if they don't know, if they don't have a good answer, tell them how you'd like to be able to buy your food and see if they can find a way to create policy solutions that get out of the way of that.
That's excellent. Those are great suggestions. Is there a way that we can follow your work? I know you write for a lot of outlets. Is there a way that we can follow you and support what you're doing, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on my website at www.brian-reisinger.com. That's Brian-Reisinger, Reisinger.com. You can find the latest columns posted there. You can sign up for my newsletter. My X account, my Facebook account are all linked there. And so anybody who wants to get in touch, I'm there and engaging with people across the country.
Sounds excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge on this topic, which is becoming more interesting to people, and more people are getting more and more involved. And I think even people that are living in high-rise condos and apartments in like Chicago and New York and downtown Cleveland and Columbus, and they go, I don't even have a balcony to grow a plant. They're becoming very aware of farmers markets and what they can do and where they can get their food. It's becoming a really important topic, long overdue to be front and center on people's lives. We've gotten spoiled by the convenience of the junk food, and we want to have whole food, real food, and be able to cook it ourselves. It's just really, really good. So thank you so much for writing the book. Thank you for, and telling us your whole story about the family's hope and the untold history of the disappearing American farmer in your book, Land Rich, Cash Poor. So I want to thank everybody who's joined us here today. This has been a marvelous conversation. And these are the types of conversations that we have every day, bringing you interesting and informative educational topics. And I think that everybody would really be ahead by buying some of these books and supporting some of the authors and getting the information and digging down, because we just have a limited amount of time here to talk about the topic. And I can tell you, I read all of these books that I do 5 days a week. I don't may not read every single word, but I read through them. So I am being blessed with incredible knowledge from these incredible authors. And I hope that you'll take advantage of it and do the same thing too. So we hope that everybody will have a really great day. We'll see you tomorrow here at 3 p.m. Eastern or the next time on the Tenpenny Files. And in the meantime, please follow me on X and Instagram at Busy Dr. T. Have a great rest of your day, everyone. We'll see you here tomorrow or the next time on the Tenpenny Files. Goodbye and God bless.